Season 7 of classic Doctor Who is held in extremely high regard almost universally among fans, a rarity in such a squabble-prone community like ours. For those who lack the obsessive encyclopedic knowledge the likes of myself have about Doctor Who, Season 7 was Jon Pertwee's first in the role, broadcast in 1970. It features the stories Spearhead from Space, the Silurians, the Ambassadors of Death, and Inferno. It was a very important season to get right, given that Doctor Who was at the end of its longest ever break to that date, with the show's future up in the air following the Second Doctor era's end. Not only did the new Barry Letts era need to steady the ship of the show, which had been on a slow decline ratings-wise for a while, but also introduced a new style of Doctor Who, one no longer roaming time and space, but bound to Earth. While the ratings may have petered out towards the end of the season, the cult status and consistent high quality of the stories revealed what was not only a smashing success at creating the new format, but also the specialness of this season, which makes it in my opinion one of the best in Doctor Who's history. In this video, we're going to have a look at why. Much is often made of how Troughton successfully reinvented the role of the Doctor in a way which almost seemed impossible at the time, and this is absolutely deserved, but I think Pertwee should get more recognition in this regard. His task was to not only create a new Doctor Who to win over audiences, but also make a very different Doctor, one who would fit in with a life on Earth. This was achieved in a few ways. The natural sense of authority that Hartnell had was returned to the character. As much as I loved the play the fool act of Troughton's Doctor, it was a necessary change, given that the third Doctor would have to walk the corridors of power, and this certainly gave the character an edge when dealing with the powerful. He also had an excellent juxtaposition in the way he deals with these kind of figures. First is the respectful and civilised third Doctor, who knows when to roll out the red carpet and act with the greatest decorum as the politest member of polite society. But when he comes across a figure of authority he disrespects and doesn't need to please, he transforms into the most confrontational anti-authority firebrand. As a result of the former, as well as the third Doctor's proclivities towards fine wine and fine living, and his position within an institution of the armed forces, many have levied the criticism that this Doctor is an establishment figure, which of course would be the opposite of what the character stands for. I, however, disagree quite strongly with this view. The Doctor is an aristocrat and always has been. He was a Time Lord, after all, but the character eschewed his privileges and a life of luxury to explore the universe and escape the suffocating weight of rules and authority Time Lord society has, as well as its desire to preserve the status quo. Although he still has the trappings of a gentleman, by this point in the character's development, they actively flout authority and challenge all institutional norms, where they don't make sense. The third Doctor is no different in this regard, railing against the closed-mindedness and short-termist approach of all establishment figures around him. He's very much a gentleman anarchist, and that to me is the character of the Doctor to a T. One of the big concerns with the new Earthbound format was that it'd limit the range of stories that could be told in Doctor Who. This was most succinctly put by writer Malcolm Hulke, who told Terrance Dicks, the script editor, that the only two types of plots the show had left available were that of an alien invasion or a mad scientist. Thus, the new format had another major obstacle, proving this theory wrong. Lo and behold, two of the stories did involve an alien invasion with Spearhead from Space and a mad scientist with Inferno. However, the other two stories, with great imagination and ingenuity, showed the different possibilities the new format could still accommodate. The first of these was the Silurians, which itself came out of that discussion between Hulke and Dicks, and was penned by Hulke. The conceit here was that rather than have the monsters come from space, they instead come from Earth, and in fact have always been here. But the Silurians went further than that. It introduced us to a whole new intelligent species, who predated man, and had hidden themselves away in order to survive a natural disaster which never came. The titular creatures are not a force of evil either. Like humans, they have the potential to be right or wrong, aggressive or peaceful. So the story is instead a tragedy, where despite the possibility for peaceful coexistence, fear and suspicion win the day, and thousands of humans and the whole colony of Silurians are killed. I think it's a great way to launch into one of the more reoccurring themes of the era, the irrational fear of humans feeding into many immoral acts. It's a conundrum Pertwee's Doctor has to wrestle with many times. The third story of the season, The Ambassadors of Death, introduced another premise for Earthbound stories, and one much used throughout the Pertwee era, the conspiracy. I say introduced, but in tandem with an alien invasion plot, half of 1968's The Invasion Were a conspiracy story, with the Doctor involved in spying and espionage, in many ways this story actually piloted what was most successful in the Jon Pertwee era. It's hardly a surprise this was a popular type of plot, given that James Bond was in the cinemas and there was an enormous success of spy TV shows such as The Avengers and Callan. The Third Doctor, at times, was quite Bond-esque with his use of gadgets, great amount of stunts, and full-on fights, as well as suave one-liners. The Ambassadors of Death, similar to the Silurians, subverts the trope of an alien invasion, with, spoilers, the aliens turning out to be peaceful and well-intentioned, with a handful of powerful human figures preventing peace and understanding due to their fear of the unknown. There certainly are quite a few layers to this particular story, arguably too many as the plot is a bit messy at points, probably a result of having a few too many writers work on it. But regardless, Ambassadors is a thrilling watch, and again shows us the worst side of humanity, from the hateful to the cynical, and really makes the Doctor question if his time on Earth is worthwhile. The grand finale to Season 7 is Inferno, which I've rudely dismissed as the mad scientist one earlier in the video, but there is much more to it than Professor Stahlman. Inferno shows us a planet, unknowingly on the edge of disaster, as the insatiable desire for resources drives our machines to the very centre of the Earth. But rather than just a tale of humanity being saved from its own hubris, the Doctor is hurled into a parallel universe while trying to fix the TARDIS, and he sees a very different version of Earth, and a doomed one. While the inhabitants of the parallel universe are similar people to our own, they live in a very different world. At some point in the 1940s, Britain became a fascist dictatorship, with the Republican security forces being the militant enforcers of the will of the leader. Both the Doctor's companion Liz and the Brigadier, now the Brigade Leader, are members of said organisation, and are very different from the amiable characters we've grown to know and love. The Brigade Leader is battle-scarred, ruthless, and dogmatic in his twisted patriotism, where the Brigadier was caring and not afraid to bend the rules a little. The Brigade Leader is a callous bureaucrat, filling in all the forms for his state-mandated violence so he can officially enact his murderous authority. Liz Shaw also has been transformed into Section Leader Shaw. Gone is the grace, wit, and ability to question, and is replaced with ruthless efficiency and dedication to the state. Unlike the Brigade Leader, cracks do show in her, revealing hints of the Liz Shaw we knew, but up to that point she'd spent a whole life perverted towards despotic ends. Other characters too are changed by this world. The control freak Stahlman thrives in a position of power, and gleefully exercises his greater influence over the military to silence any opposition to his views, an influence granted to him in this world due to his perceived greater value to the goals of the state. Greg Sutton is like a caged animal, his charming outspokenness outlawed by a society that values conformity. Only due to his special skills has he survived deportation to a labour camp, but even then, he sits on the edge of being sent there, even with these skills. Eventually, this world without the Doctor in time to make a difference faces extinction through the violent forces unleashed by the Inferno project. Witnessing this disaster, I believe, is what shows the Doctor he can't just be a wanderer who abandons situations of peril. He can't just escape his exile and not interfere with events to avoid Time Lord detection. He realises not only that he was right to interfere as he had done in the past, but often it was necessary to prevent disaster. Multiple times this season, the Doctor has tried to leave Earth, even during very precarious situations, like in Spearhead or Inferno. He's also experienced a great distaste towards humans and their nature, with the destruction of the Silurian colony, the kidnapping of alien ambassadors out of fear, and a dark version of our world where despotic and violent impulses are allowed to run free. But the lesson the character learns from Inferno is that he is needed on Earth, and anywhere else he may go, as the Time Lords were wrong, and his interference has largely been a positive force, and one that Earth desperately needs as it teeters close towards Cold War destruction. We can see the impact of this throughout the Pertwee era, as his Doctor becomes the most concerned with Earth and involved in its minor intricacies that other Doctors would just ignore. It could be argued that this is because he's been exiled to Earth, but even once the TARDIS is returned to him, fully functioning, he regularly makes deliberate visits back to Earth and UNIT, as this incarnation sees the important role he has to play beyond just his exploring. Season 7 is such a wonderful, if intense set of stories. The oppressive institutional power, combined with the fear of impending disaster, gives each episode such an edge which isn't afraid to keep all the way till the end of the story. The Doctor only wins in half the stories here. In the Silurians, the whole colony is destroyed. In Inferno, a whole world is engulfed in flame. This is the Doctor brought down from all his starstruck travelling and experiencing the harsh reality of the real world and staying in one place. It's fascinating to watch and is one of the most unique seasons in the whole long history of the show. We haven't even really talked about Spearhead from Space, mostly because it's a very solid run-of-the-mill type Doctor Who story and didn't really fit in with what I wanted to say here. This makes sense given it was from a different producer, Derek Sherwin, who handed over to Barry Letts for the Silurians. I also haven't even mentioned how great Caroline John is as Liz Shaw, or the foundations of the Udit family this era later became remembered for. But this video was focusing on what made Season 7 so distinctive and such a great grounding for the Third Doctor's era. It's my favourite season of Doctor Who, and it gives me everything I want from the show. Long-form storytelling, a veritable powder keg of tension, a superb selection of memorable side characters, a Doctor truly tested to his limits, and a feeling of intensity, as this is a season where you don't know if the Doctor will win or not, and that makes the stakes so much more impactful. Thank you for listening to my long ramble about Season 7, and why I love it, just to prove I'm not negative shit all the time. Have I overanalyzed some of this? It's entirely possible, but I do think there's a great deal more intent behind the writing in Classic Who than people give it credit for. It may not come out and state it plainly to the audience, but I do think it's there to be found.